My name is Aziz Richardson.
And my name is Thais Gallman.
Last episode, we focused on things that impact us and our communities every day, whether it be directly or through the trickle-down effect, as we call it. Particularly youthism in politics. Once we raise these amazing young leaders, what challenges do they face? Any barriers to entry? Is age a barrier to entry? If so, what can we expect moving forward when it comes to politics and the very fibers of society as we know?
In today's episode, we will be focusing on sexuality and gender revolution, both inside and outside the debate community. In 2017, we have been seeing an influx of academic, social, and political safe spaces where gender and sexuality are the topics. All around the country, and especially here in Newark, young people have begun to speaking out against homophobia and transphobia, along with starting their own movements and organizations to protect the civil rights of the LGBTQ and to create media that employs LGBTQ writers.
Students just like the ones here in Newark are creating polarizing discussions in the public arena that is causing people to rethink everything they know and have been taught about the spectrums of gender and sexuality. Since the debate community is a reflection of the world around us, there has also been an influx of debates that explore topics such as the rights and safety of trans sex workers, the fight to get states to recognize genders other than male or female or security documents, and the shocking amount of sexual violence that affect women of color in women prisons all over the country.
Today we will be speaking with Willie Johnson, head coach of the national acclaimed Rutgers debate team here in Newark, and some of our very own students in the community, some who participate and don't participate in the debate, about where they see national conversations about gender and identity resulting in years from now, and about how the roles identities play in their lives as students and educators.
Before we start, we thought it would be important to give the viewers a little bit of background on the history of champions in debate. Much like sports and other activities, debate for years and years was run by schools that could only afford to pay for diverse coaching. Diversity in terms of specific coaching for specific arguments. Just like how in basketball where you would get a specific coach for specific defense tactics. Traveling all around the country to compete in a myriad of other overhead costs that in the both high school and collegiate divisions usually amounted to tens of thousands of dollars. This kind of expense meant that only schools that could afford to commit this much money to an activity doesn't make any money could afford to do so.
This fostered years and years of white male success because the schools who could afford coaching, tournament fees, and traveling, where they were also predominantly white. Almost 10 years ago, the first black team won the Cross-Examination Debate Association tournament, one of the two largest tournaments in the country. Years later, we have seen more minority success in the activity than ever before. This includes the LGBTQ debaters, meaning that now there are more conversations about gender and sexuality in the debate than ever before. As mentioned earlier, today we will be speaking to Willie Johnson and 4 Newark students, 2 of them being current debaters, about how they can relate to the polarizing conversations about gender and identity taking place in their schools like there's around in the other countries. But before, here's some news you may have missed.
Hello, my name is Taylor Vermont, and I'll be presenting What's Hot on the Block. Shout out to our very own Bradley Gomia for taking the lead in reestablishing the Newark Student Union in the next few months. For those of you that do not know, Bradley actually used to host the Newark Debater when it first got started over a year ago. He will soon be featured so we can hear all about his latest endeavors. Google the Newark Students Union to learn more about it and how you can get involved. Congratulations to the NJC's program for their outstanding work in the community and their historic turnout at this past Youth Summit, where more than 200 adults representing 19 states attended. This particular summit gave them the opportunity to learn more about the challenges facing the agricultural industry by attending workshops, participating in hands-on activities, and interacting with agricultural researchers and advocates. Finally, believe it or not, the Governor's Highway Safety Association estimates there were roughly 6,000 pedestrian fatalities nationwide in 2016, up 11% from the prior year. State police data shows 602 of those pedestrians who died in collisions with motor vehicles were in New Jersey. Because of this, New Jersey council members in multiple districts are proposing a $50 fine for every pedestrian found looking at their phone while crossing the street. Do you think this is fair? Let us know what you think at thenorkdebater@gmail.com. And now, back to our show.
Welcome back. Let's welcome Rutgers University head coach Willie Johnson and our very own North students.
Woo!
Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself? Like, where were you born and how did you got into debate in the first place?
Oh, thank you for the introduction. Well, so for me, I'm a coach for the Rutgers debate team. We work with a lot of different students, so we also have a lot of successful students, which I think is amazing. Me being a debater in the Bronx in New York City, I debated for the New York Urban Debate League. One of the things that I think was fundamentally kind of swayed me towards debate was I seen the first competition. It was a discussion about nuclear weapons and just weapons of mass destruction in general. And it wasn't really the content of the conversation, but it was like the power that the debaters kind of captured from the audience. That, and also is that I enjoy the kind of culture of the team and the individuals that were participating on my debate team. So it was that's a great place. I'm kind of already weird.
Yeah.
Okay, so how important is eliminating homophobia and sexism in our schools?
Wow, that's a jump. But one of the things I think that is most important for eliminating homophobia and sexism in schools is the fact that we are a community. When we're in schools, when we're participating in activities, we function as a community. Even if we are in competition, we function as a community. So the issue is that when we produce kind of negative images about some of our members in our community, and furthermore than that is that we also create kind of violence, psychologically and actual physical violence that we enact on them because they are different, because they choose to love in a different way, because they exist in a different way, because they express themselves in a different way. That kind of mentality is what destroys the ability for us to function as a community, and more so for these people to live happy lives, because they don't really control, they can't really control what other people think about, how they love, even though, it is unique and it is genuine and each individual have their, special way of connecting with people. It's not for us to be attacking them because they are different.
So because you work at Rutgers and you're a coach there, do you think that homophobia and sexism is a problem at your work or the school?
I want to say yes and no. I want to say yes because there is no culture that fundamentally defends the rights of individuals like trans and homosexual, people who engage in homosexuality, lesbian, gays, queers, bisexual people. There's no culture that really defends them other than the culture that the people produce. So the way in which politics and medicine and all these other fields kind of stop them from, being able to live comfortably is what kind of makes all spaces bad to inhabit. If you are one of those individuals. But I think we are moving, particularly in the space that I work in, we are moving more towards not just tolerance, which I think is kind of what everybody is vibing for, is tolerance, but moving towards understanding, comprehension, and building from that the ability to kind of reproduce our communities with these larger conversations, these important conversations about how life is lived differently for everyone.
This is another question built upon what my co-host said. Do you think that your school administration cares? Cares about you from gender or sexuality-based bullying, and are there specific punishments or ramifications from that?
Yes, we have definitely harassment claims that can be made on the level of harassing people for particular identities, kind of not to be all into legal jargon, but Title IX claims can definitely be filed, harassment claims can be filed to HR, but it's not even that point where that violence happens. I feel particularly in the space that I work in, Rutgers University, they are definitely very progressive in the sense of how they hire people, how they employ people, and how they empower people. Right, I think they do a lot to kind of establish that sexual fluidity, sexual freedom, just the ability to love who you love is kind of what the college itself expresses. So I think yes, they are ahead in that, but at the same time, I think the community overall is not. So yes, the administration might be ahead, but I think Rutgers as a community could fundamentally probably see more changes. But that's really not my forte. I'm kind of more in terms of debate.
This is a question for the debaters. Being that with all of the recent minority success in the activity, debate still remains predominantly white and male. Do you feel like that you have a safe enough platform in debate to discuss your identity in any way you desire? I feel like we have an answer over there.
All right, so I think that it depends on where exactly you're doing debate, right? So within our community, NDA, I feel like we have a safe enough space because everyone here is technically a minority. Like everyone belongs to is a person of color. Everyone has shared these experiences that we go through as a result of our socioeconomic status, racism, sexism, a lot more. But yet, I know I have a friend who lives in New Hampshire, and she does debate there as well. And she tells me all the time that her form of debate over there in New Hampshire, where it's predominantly white, predominantly male, all that, in comparison to Newark, where we're all, black and brown bodies, is a lot more different in the sense that she feels like she can't be heard for what she is. Like, she feels like she has to dilute her own sense of, individuality in terms of, how she can speak in debate and how the type of arguments she runs, how she says them, and the list goes on. So I feel like it depends on where you are necessarily in debate, or, the type of community you surround yourself with, or the type of community there is that generates that sense of, safety and protection in terms of talking to or about what your identity.
I have a follow-up question.
Okay.
Right? So, given that you compete in the activity and you compete against these predominantly white and male debaters, right? How do you feel as a woman of color, given the situation of debate being so competitive?
All right, so I've gone against a lot of people in my time debating, and most of them have been predominantly white, predominantly male. And the thing with that, I feel like talking about issues that resonate within me, I feel more so empowered, so to say, because debate has given me a voice to speak about the issues that, I see going on around me, the issues that affect me personally. And I feel as though when I speak about them in the debate room, where it's just my partner and I and my opponents and the judge, I feel like I have a sense of, strength within me to be able to talk about them and actually voice my opinion to the people who don't experience the same thing as me, so that I can convey to them my own experiences, convey to the judge, have my voice be heard, and maybe, have some change outside of the debate room.
And now we have a question for the students. Are teachers starting to introduce topics that centralize around identity as a part of your classroom learning? If not, do you think your community would react?
Talk about in-depth discussions. For example, if a teacher is wanting to talk about racial identity, they don't get too in-depth about it. They just wash over the topic in order to move on to the next lesson. I think that in classrooms we need more in-depth discussions about these types of issues, or else we won't get that understanding and comprehension of where people come from or their sexual identities as well. If in classroom we start to think about it, I don't think students would react well. They would want to never have these types of discussions because they either feel uncomfortable talking about it, or they've never had these discussions before, so they don't feel open to discussing these types of things. They'll either shy away or want the teacher to move on to another lesson.
Another question. Do you think Newark is becoming more understanding, respectful, and tolerant of non-straight people and ideals? Why or why not?
I don't know. I feel like that's a loaded question, because there's a lot of programs that are being developed to uniquely protect, the gendered population, the queer population, LGBTQ population. I think I won't say the T part. I think there's still a lot of resistance towards trans and kind of transsexuality in general. But I think that Newark as a city, I don't think Newark as a place totalistically has done anything to produce an effort to show change in that kind of relationship between kind of heteronormativity and homosexuality or queer or gender fluidity. I think there is communities. I think that the communities are doing that. I don't think that the politics are really matching, but I think that the communities, the centers, are fundamentally working to produce better solutions. I also think that there needs to be particular things that are developed in Newark in order for Newark to be progressive on this, for toleration. hospitals or medical centers that are particularly for like homosexual people who are like gay, people who are lesbian, people who are like queer, people who are gender fluidity, people who are trans, right? Hospitals that serve that unique population, because I think that there's a particular care that needs to go into this community that current medicine and current kind of communal practices don't really reflect or represent. And it is leading to a lot of kind of like violence to, you know, trans people, because there is no tolerance, right? As much as we can say our politics represent our tolerance, it's not true, right? It's a question of whether or not the people, you know, in the communities have established that we will not kill trans women. We will not, you know, allow for gay bashing to happen. We will not allow for violence against, you know, people who, you know, perform their genders differently. It is not until we can do that, and we as a community can say that, that we can say that places like Newark is uniquely tolerable.
Exactly. For the debaters in the room, do you think having a debate that centers on sexuality and winning it means you change someone's mindset? If not, do you think that will ever be the case? I see an answer coming from over there.
Okay, so just because you bring up an argument about sexuality and you win that argument doesn't mean that you're changing your judge's mind, because like it's a starting point, because you're having this discussion in the debate space and you're having this discourse, but like it doesn't necessarily mean that you're changing your opponent's mind on the topic or that you're changing your judge's mind either. So having this discussion in the debate space, like it's a starting point.
I would like to play devil's advocate to that. I think that it actually does change the mindsets of individuals. I've seen debate rounds that have been so impactful, that have shaped kind of the ways in which I decide to, you know, determine myself and also teach my students. So there has been a lot of, in debate, conversations about sexuality, conversations about transphobia, conversations about dysphoria, and just conversations in general about things that I am not personally aware to, because being a queer black male, I don't have the relationship to things like trans women or women in general, right? So I think debate and having those conversations, that dialogue, that particular engagement has shaped the mindset of individuals. Sometimes it's because people be just using arguments for the sake of winning debates, right? Like you'll have a person who like anti-blackness and they're not black. Right, is that people use it because argumentation, particularly identity politics, is a good way in which to kind of sway individuals to believing that they're morally or ethically wrong, or there's something that they have kind of omitted to not resolving or not understanding. So I think that yes, it can change mindsets, but I think that the way in which it's divisive in debate kind of takes away from like the real conversation that are developed by the individuals who really fight these resistance.
So another question for Willie. How important is your identity, whether it's in your racial, sexuality, or in your gender?
It's everything. It's everything, because it's like I wear it and it kind of also explains like my culture. Like I can't go anywhere and be like, yo, I'm Willie, because like if it's like old white people, then I'm like, well, you're a Negro or a black person, right? I can't just like be openly like I'm queer, because then you have like Catholic members of like, you know, my family, or you have just like, you know, individuals in the street who just don't understand what it means to fundamentally be queer, even though queer is really more so just about the fluidity of how you understand and love the world, right? So for me, my identity is everything, because my identity produces a hermeneutics for me of how I view the world, how I examine, how I should engage every conversation. And for me, I feel like one of the things that like is fundamentally important to me in the ways I have like developed myself is that I feel like I queer mother a lot of like, you know, other people. And I think it's fundamentally important to have those like, you know, people in your life that don't see the world like you and have their own understanding of the world. And I think that for everyone, it is understanding yourself and understanding your identity. So things like your race, things like your socioeconomic background, things like your culture, things like your sexuality, you should understand those things and to some extent explore those things, because they define who you are.
So how often do you feel like discriminated against?
See, that's a funny question too, because there's a lot of like microaggressions that happen. Like microaggressions being like these kind of like small triggers or small things that kind of attack you at your like kind of like, you know, your kind of like identity level. So, you know, people say things that are kind of racist, kind of anti-black, and like that'll hurt, right? But I've never, like, I don't often feel like just outright attacked, right? I've had a couple examples of that. Like, one example is I had a kind of an argument with a adjudicator in the collegiate debate community during the CETA tournament, where like he accused two Afro-Latino males of being responsible for the ways in which like debate violence, particularly predominantly white, predominantly male, produce sexual violence that makes it unable for us to access consent. We was making an argument about like how slavery made it for black people who couldn't consent to the politics that was produced against them. He made it about like sexual violence in debate that like my students should never be equivalated with. So in that situation, I felt not only attacked as a educator who is trying to protect their students, but I also felt attacked as a Afro-Latino male, and the fact that like I can be blamed for the violence that white males produce in the debate community. So in that case, I felt really attacked, and I said things that I think was very unprofessional, and I engaged in a way that was very unprofessional. But it was the only way I could express myself in that moment, being from like a place where like it's fight or flight.
Is it important to you to have friends that are different from you? Why?
It is important to have friends that are different from you, and I think that we all can attest to it. The students here as well as y'all, right? Is that it's always good to have different perspectives of how like people are engaging you. The same thing I was saying like in the last question, right? Is that like different perspectives help you understand your world better and understand yourself better. In terms of like, do I have a diverse group of people? Is yes and no. I do mostly kind of hang with black people. It's just like one of those things where like it just happens. It's kind of like a culture thing. But I do also love the relationship that I have with the diversity of friends that I do have. And like I don't point it out as like, oh, I have a diverse group of friends. But it's more so, it's just like I grew up always in a diverse kind of situation. Like I had like Asian and African and like Latino friends in middle school and elementary school, and we all hung out. It was almost like a family. I would stay at their house and I would explore, well, not necessarily explore because that sounds kind of like Christopher Columbusing, but more so is that like I would be invited to their cultures, and that for me meant that for me diversity just was my thing. Like diversity was just something I grew up in. So I can't just be pointing out like this is diverse. For me, this is just like, it's life, really.
And now, it's about that time for our last segment of the day. Today's game is called Speech Twister, and it simulates some of the speaking drills debaters use to become more fluid speakers. Each player, 4 total, has to read a random tongue twister while being timed and complete whatever specific requirement, if any, applies that round. The participant that completes all 3 rounds, the fastest wins. The slowest player will be eliminated after each round. So in the first round, the contestants will read through a phrase as quickly as they can. This is all about speed. So, is everybody ready?
Yeah.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, go.
Peter Piper,
Peter Piper, Peter We're the pack of the pickle. Peppers, Peter Piper.
We're the pack of pickled the Peter Piper pickle.
Betty Butter.
All right. Okay. All right. So you are out of here.
What? I was slowing down.
You were doing it on purpose.